Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Bengal Tiger Recruiting Podcast. I'm Billy Embody. With me is Shay Dixon, live from Orlando. As you guys noticed there, he is holed up in one of those ballrooms in the hotel, getting this podcast out to you. I know we usually do the recruiting pod, but this is going to be definitely a hodgepodge of news because with the holidays, we just haven't been able to get together. And of course, lucky for us, we didn't jump on a pod yesterday, Shay, because we now have some major breaking news to talk about with the future of LSU's 2023 roster, with Kayshon Boutte opting to declare for the 2023 NFL draft just weeks after he announced he was going to return to the Tigers for 2023. This is huge news. So let's go ahead. And first of all, how's Orlando been? How have you been doing down there in my home state?
Yes, it has been solid. We did Universal Studios yesterday, and so that was Wednesday, and we did not have any express pass or anything like that. But word from the wise now, because I've spent a full day at the park. If you want to get in all the roller coasters, just get in the single rider line, much quicker. They last 30 seconds. You don't really need to be sitting with whoever you're with anyways. So knocked out a bunch. That was fun. We'll see what today holds. As you said, I'm at the team hotel. I'm in a random ballroom right now. I was previously in a ballroom that right after we got set up, Billy, turned into the kids' daycare, and the papa shot and screaming of kids was not going to work out. So now I am in a random ballroom that is quiet for the moment. If you're watching on YouTube, I've got a nice halo sort of coming across my head. The lighting in here is not great, but we made it work. I traveled with my mic, Billy, so I've got that much going for me.
Well, you can kind of be that angel that flies down to LSU fans to maybe whisper in their ear to get off the ledge of thinking there's a ton of things wrong with the program, that all of a sudden Kayshon Boutte is declared for the draft. And look, I mean, this is one of those things where he announced his intention to return. We posted on the board, and you had the scoop on it, that Kayshon was going to be suspended for this game for a violation of team rules. And that was Wednesday around lunch. Fast forward a few hours, and I'm making dinner with my wife, and there it is. Kayshon Boutte declares for the 2023 NFL draft. I reached out to Kayshon on Twitter and said, "Hey, is this true? Are you being hacked?" And reached out to some sources, and Kayshon responded right away. I still had that worry in my mind that maybe this is somebody on his Twitter and doing this, because it just came out of nowhere. But it's true. Kayshon Boutte declares for the NFL draft. You are on the ground there. Walk us through kind of the reaction that you're kind of picking up, and obviously this news that Kayshon Boutte is now off to the NFL.
Yeah, like I said, I'm staying at the team hotel, and I could kind of gauge from reactions as the news was coming out that there were some people surprised by it, others not so much. And I think you can go back, Billy, to when he announced he was coming back. That was the surprise. It wasn't a surprise that he ultimately decides to go pro, that after 3 years, you're a 5-star. You had some incredible production as a freshman. You've been injured in Kayshon's situation since then. Obviously got injured as a sophomore, didn't look the same as a junior, certainly didn't have the same production, volume, targets, all of that. And when he announced he was coming back, it was okay. Then he wants to put out one more year of film. Like when he returned, when he announced he was coming back, there were some people that were like, this is not going to be over until the deadline in January. And certainly we didn't even have to get into January to find out that he did change his mind. He reversed his course. He's going to turn pro. And I don't like, people are looking into this every which way possible to say, what is Kayshon seeing that might be wrong with the team? I don't think it's that at all. I think this is a decision that Kayshon's making. He didn't travel to the bowl game. He was suspended for a violation of team rules. So he knew long before today he wasn't playing in the bowl. In fact, he knew when he announced he was coming back that he wasn't playing in the bowl. So I'm not surprised at the ultimate result. I'm just surprised at I'm coming back, I'm not coming back, I'm suspended for the bowl game, like whole little 3-4 week stretch that we just went through. But phenomenal player. Billy, for me, he hasn't looked the same since that injury. And he said that going into this past season that he didn't feel 100%. It looked like he wasn't 100% for much of the beginning of the season. I'm curious what his draft stock will look like because he was popping up on some mock drafts as a first rounder, a late first round guy, even with the season that was far below what expectations were. If you're an LSU fan, look, you monitor that, you see where he goes, you root for him in the pros, all that. They're fine at receiver. And we'll talk about this when we break down their class, Billy, but how often did we wonder, even when Kayshon announced he was coming back, if they could hold on to all four receivers they had committed, and all four of them signed. So your room gets that much deeper. You thought all along that Kayshon and Jure were going to be the two guys who were not going to be on the team anymore. Jure was a senior. Kayshon was draft eligible. And the thought was, okay, those two guys will be gone. Everyone else will be back. The only guy who hit the portal was Jack Besh, which wasn't a major surprise given where his playing time went from year one to year two. But you bring back, look, the bowl game will show us a lot in terms of what their top three guys are right now. It would be Malik, it's BT, Brian Thomas, and Kyron Lacey. Those are kind of your top three if you take out Boutte and Dre Jenkins. Then you move into the offseason, you're going to get a look at Landon Ibieta. Chris Hilton is healthy again. You go down to these new four guys that are coming in. I don't know if I'm missing anybody else in that mix, but they'll be at double-digit receivers. So that's a deeper room than you had this year. And there's a thought that, hey, this group now with Jaden and Nuss and Walker all back, and certainly with Nuss and Jaden, guys they've really repped with a lot and will obviously be in competition to be playing, that they have a lot better rapport with them, going into the offseason. So it's not the end of the world that Kayshon went pro. In fact, it's what we all expected all along. It was just that 3 or 4 weeks where we thought he was coming back. That was the big surprise.
Yeah, and I think kind of looking back on this, I mean, some people on the board said, "Oh, this is because Jaden's coming back." It's not. Like the rumor for so long was that Jaden Daniels was going to return to LSU, and it was just a matter of when he was going to announce it. If that was the final decision, if that was set in stone, and he announced obviously that he was returning. And Kayshon congratulated him on and said, "Run it back" on Instagram. Now, he was suspended for a violation of team rules. Brian Kelly said when Kayshon returned that their relationship was evolving. And he said that knowing that, Kayshon wasn't going to play in the bowl game. He said it on, I believe, December 15th, long after they knew he wasn't going to be playing. So I think Kayshon's last year is certainly one that I would just call interesting, from, trying to battle back from his injury. He said he kind of worked through, let's just say that maturing process to handle the rehab, to be where he needed to be. Brian Kelly said it, I think, at a signing day press conference, that he didn't have a relationship with Kayshon. He hadn't seen him around much. Clearly, there were things going on across the last year. You look back at around this time last year, all the rumor was Kayshon Boutte is going to transfer to Alabama, and we passed through that point of his career. This was, I think, one of those things where I would have thought, especially with him being a dad now, he would have just gone pro. I think maybe with the violation of team rules, he said, "You know what? Maybe college isn't for me. Maybe this situation isn't what's best for me to have the best career and make a living. And I need to go ahead and get out of school and move on to that next level."
Yeah, and we don't know everything that's going on in a kid's life. Look, he's 21 years old. He came in with lofty expectations. They didn't hit as a junior, and he had to make a tough call. You mentioned it. I mean, in the past year, the birth of his first child in the middle of the season, that, remember, he took a game off. Brian Kelly gave him the game off because he wanted to be there for the birth of his first child. That's going to weigh heavy on you. The mental side, beyond physical, of trying to come back from an injury, trying to be number 7, trying to be the guy that really leads the receiver room. That's a lot to put on a college kid. It just is. And as you noted, and I think it's important as I say what I'm saying next, there was a real flirtation a year ago when you were going through coaching changes from the prior regime to Brian Kelly and this new staff, that he was going to hit the portal and that Bama was going to be after him, and that's where he would go. And now you get to where we're at now. And from just talking to a number of people, half of them, I would say, had the opinion you sense that it was always sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And I think the past month describes that well, right? Like he went from I'm coming back to no, I'm not anymore and I'm leaving. It's now, I think, the book we can officially close. It's no chapters left. This is it for his college career. He'll move on. This is the time for Malik and Brian Thomas and Kyron Lacey and the rest of these guys, the newcomers, to all step up into bigger roles. And certainly they're ready for that. The beat goes on. And look, Kayshon is not at the bowl game. So all these receivers have already been practicing and moving on without him in terms of bowl preparation. That just now remains the same through the offseason. And the other thing is the reality here is the wide receivers who he's with every day probably knew what he was up to in terms of, yeah, he said he's coming back, but now he's suspended. He might not come back anymore. That's not a shock to them. But best of luck to Kayshon. That was a big snag for them to get out of New Iberia and Westgate. And it's kind of a tough timing for those kids who all came in during the COVID year. There were no crowds. There was coaching changes that followed. They were going through back-to-back 500 seasons. Tough times. So for Kayshon, best of luck moving forward. But I do think this is the end of it. I don't think we're getting another tweet that says, I've changed my mind again and now I'm coming back. It is time to move forward as a program. And I think that's what Brian Kelly will do.
Yeah, I think anytime you lose a guy like Kayshon as a talent, I mean, it's a loss. I mean, just being able to
No doubt.
roll out receivers like that is just, that's what you want. That's the type of depth you want as a program. But if he wasn't going to be in and all in, that's something that Brian Kelly's really tried to address with his program is we need guys that are going to be all in. And if you're not, buying in and aligned, then you're going to have issues, as our third member of our podcast walks into the room, the cat. But I just feel like for Kayshon, he's one of those guys that over the last year has kind of just shown probably just needs to go pro, needs to make money, obviously support his family. And best of luck to him. I hope it works out, and he has a long, lengthy career and does all the things that we saw in him as a 5-star prospect, a guy they beat out Alabama for. Bama was always pushing. Bama never let up for Kayshon Boutte.
Beat out Bama multiple times, it sounds like.
Multiple times. And, kudos to LSU at the time for winning that recruiting battle. So, I think people are always going to talk about, well, what happened. But, I think over the last year, we've seen enough of up and down from Kayshon, just on and off the field, to know that's probably the way that best sums it up. So they'll have Malik Neighbors, they'll have Brian Thomas, they'll have Kyron Lacey, but they'll also have the 4 signees in Shelton Sampson, Jalen Brown, Kyle Parker, Kai Preon, and of course the transfer edition in Alabama wide receiver Aaron Anderson, all coming into the receiver room. All guys that, will get on the field or have opportunities to early on, I think, for the most part, and enter that kind of fringe rotation behind the 3 guys we talked about that are already on the roster and certainly have big roles in this offense and have had big roles in this offense all season. So it's not one that you like to see because of how talented he is, but if he wasn't going to be bought in, it's probably for the best that he just goes ahead and does this. So best of luck to Kayshon. Appreciate him responding and making sure it was true last night. And, we'll see what the NFL draft process, looks like for him as, like you said, he wasn't, up to full speed again this season. So hopefully he gets some time to kind of, prepare himself and go run well and do all the things that he does well. So moving on, 15 minutes into the podcast now, Shay, the other big news, we're gonna turn it up and bring it back to the positive side of things. LSU Arkansas on the hardwood last night. And look, we're gonna get Maddie B on the podcast. I believe probably tomorrow, and we're gonna have to talk a little bit about that more in depth. But look, the Tigers win 60-57 in the PMAC. Place was rocking. They beat a top 10 Arkansas team to lead off conference play. Trey Hannibal was dominant. The defense held Arkansas to 37% from the field, 16% from three-point range, and the bench outscored the Razorbacks 25-0. Shay, this was a huge win for the Tigers and one that kind of is an early, signature win for Matt McMahon this season.
Oh, for sure. And I think that the crowd last night, my parents went to the game, said it was one of the best crowds they had seen in a while, and they were there for every Will Wade game. And Matty B had talked about it on the board. The crowd was into it. Even with students, students are not in session right now. They won't be back till January. They had a number of students there. They put some general admission tickets in the student section to fill it out. They all showed out. But in terms of what we're seeing, and like I said, Matty B is our ace on the basketball front. He'll catch us up on all of that. But I think you're seeing how a guy like Matt McMahon was winning 30 games a year at Murray State. You play really good defense. You limit teams' possessions. You, in a sense, limit your own, which makes them count even more. You play a very deep bench. I mean, I think 11 guys were in the game last night. Arkansas was playing maybe 8 guys. So you're going to see a lot more people playing, and they're really good out of timeouts. They're very well coached, you can tell. And it's a lot to me like the Brian Kelly buy-in. Like, you have to buy into this new way of playing basketball, preparing, executing, defense, all these different elements that Matt McMahon wants to preach and make the cornerstones of his program. And getting a win right out of the gates. I mean, there were people that were projecting LSU would win 3 games in the SEC. I don't know how many they'll win, but they've won 1 and they've lost none. And it was to a top 10 team, over a top 10 team in Arkansas. So huge win. And I think, Billy, probably more than anything, it gets people invested in the Matt McMahon era right out of the gates, because really they could be undefeated right now. I mean, they had a wild loss. What was that? Kansas State, where they had kind of scored at the end, but the clock hadn't started yet, and they were playing in a high school gym in the middle of nowhere. And it was kind of one of those things where you're like, man, that could have gone either way. And if it had, LSU would be undefeated. Instead, just 1 loss. But their non-con schedule, Billy, was not great, outside of a few teams. Wake Forest, they played Kansas State, a couple of others, but it was teams they should have beaten, and a lot of games were close. And I think that's just the brand of basketball they're at right now, just with the pieces they have to work with. But it also means you can go out and play really close against a team like Arkansas and beat them, and that was big for them. So there's real excitement. Look, we're fresh off Kayshon news, fresh off signing day, about to play in a bowl game, in less than a week here, 4 or 5 days out, and our entire board is about basketball. I did not think that would happen. So people are excited for the Matt McMahon era. You could not have scripted a better start. Get through the non-con schedule with just 1 loss, which is a very close one, and then come out and beat a top 10 team in your very first SEC game at home. That really helps set the tone, and certainly probably has his players buying in even more to kind of what he wants to do with his program.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a complete rebuild. I mean, for them to lead off league play in Matt McMahon's first, season with.
I mean, remember, Billy, they had 0 people on roster at one point before Bawani Wilkinson and what's his name came back. Why am I blanking? Backup guard.
Adam Miller obviously came back late.
Oh, yeah, but he was hurt.
Right.
Oh man, I'm blanking on his name. Well, they had both hit the portal, both guys, and I know Adam Miller is sort of in between things. Justice Williams, right?
Oh, there we go. Yes, Justice Williams.
So that at one point, Justice and Mawani were in the portal. So they were down to nobody. And if Adam Miller wasn't going to come back, it was nobody. Well, they get those 3, bring some Murray State kids in, hit the portal, got a number of other kids. So you knew it was going to be a very patchwork. It's a lot like the football team, like very patchwork. Expectations are low. You're just starting to build the program out, but we're starting to see flashes beyond Adam Miller early on of who can actually be kind of a big-time player for him. And certainly last night, Trey Hannibal was that guy who carried them throughout the game and then made the big buckets down the stretch. And I think we've seen, at least through the start of it, that Matt McMahon is good at identifying who's got the hot hand in the game, and we're drawing up plays for that guy. So it was Hannibal last night. He had a great night. They gave him the post-game locker room bath with all the water bottles, and LSU put this out. I know some other people, Cobble had some video, but for people who say Matt McMahon has no juice, he doesn't bring the energy, boy, he looked pretty pumped up after that game, going into the student section and riling everybody up. So getting a taste of what's to come with the basketball team. And let's be real here. Scott Woodward's hires are looking very good that he's made. Kim Mulkey's got the basketball team completely turned around. Jay Johnson and the baseball team are number one in recruiting and the polls, and look to be an Omaha contender for sure. And now we're seeing what Matt McMahon's doing with this basketball team, obviously what Brian Kelly did with the football team. A lot of reason for optimism around the LSU campus in terms of where they're headed across all sports.
No question about that. A win like that maybe moves along some PMAC renovations, but that's just a little fodder for the podcast. But hey, Shay, more good news for us. We can finally unveil, and I actually had it up at the beginning of the podcast here, our new sponsor. You and I were texting with Richard, the owner of rogueshop.com, yesterday to get our orders in to start trying some of their products. If you have issues sleeping, chronic pain, stress, anxiety, those are the products that they have for you. Rogue Shop sells CBD, THC, edibles, smokables, bath salts, pain creams, topicals, vapes, candles, soaps, whatever. They're all handcrafted by this veteran-owned business, husband and wife, Richard and Shar. They've been awesome to get to know so far. We're excited to try all their stuff, but it's a craft cannabis. They're craft cannabis farmers, and it's a small batch outfit. Sustainable plant medicine, a true holistic type of small business. They own a dispensary in Wisconsin, and all of their stuff is licensed by the USDA, and they're third-party tested by Botanicor and ACS Labs. Look, Shay, we have been looking at different sponsorship opportunities for this podcast for a minute now. I know we're excited about this one. The website just has a 24/7 chat function. I actually jumped on there yesterday when we were picking out our stuff, and Shar was the one on the other side answering the questions that I had. So that is kind of their pitch in a way. They are small husband and wife owned companies, veteran owned, and they still do all their stuff handcrafted because they don't like how it's all going to kind of the big mass production and things like that. So they've been a blast to get to know and work with so far. We're really excited about this partnership. We do have a promo code for you guys. It's right here on the screen. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, it's just Bengal Tiger, all one word. I believe you get 10% off your order at rogueshop.com, ROGUE shop.com. Issue sleeping, chronic pain, anxiety, stress. I mean, that's the name of the game. That's what they're in it for. I know I get done playing hockey. I'm excited to try the pain cream that they have to kind of let my body recharge and kind of settle down after some late night beer league hockey games. So, Shay, if you have anything more to add, we're just excited to start this partnership and get it going with you guys.
Yeah, and I feel like too, we're in the CBD era and everything. It's kind of like NIL, where people think it's like a sticky thing to talk about, and it's under the table. Oh no, it's legal now. But Rogue Shop has worked with a lot of different On3 sites already, sponsoring different elements of podcasts and boards and stuff like that. So we're pumped to get to know them. We should say too, you can support them based off not just your need for any sort of, like you said, sleep habit stuff, back pain, two things that I have issues with already, and I'm only 36 years old. So this will continue on through life. But we also massive college football fans and big dislikers of the Texas A&M Aggies. I hate to just put it out there like that, but you're at least supporting a brand who big football fans, and I believe he's a big Texas fan. So.
Yes, he's they were in San Antonio, or they live in San Antonio, but they are also based out of Wisconsin, so they're licensed to run their company and manufacture it in Wisconsin and Texas, but they ship all over. So they grow their own cannabis. They do everything by hand. I mean, they're just awesome. I mean, we did spend half that conversation on the phone with them talking about how they're excited to get to all these SEC schools now that Texas is coming into the SEC soon. Obviously they want to beat the Aggies now that they'll be in the SEC and having to play them again. They're ready for that. So we've got a big college football fan on our hands. He's going to be active on the boards. He's a member of our Inside Texas site. So show them some love, reach out, try it. They also own a cannabis consulting company called Don't Grow It Yourself. So they're just all in on this. They've really bought into doing it the right way. So we're excited to partner with them. We're excited to try all their stuff. And we've heard great things from talking with the other On3 sites. We really, dove in deep to this. This has been going on, I think, for about a month. So we're excited to try it. We're excited for the sponsorship. And thank you to rogueshop.com for sponsoring the podcast. You'll see them once a week on our podcast. Again, promo code Bengal Tiger, 10% off. Legal CBD, THC, and more. So if you have anxiety, stress, chronic pain, and trouble sleeping, just check them out, rogueshop.com. So, Shay, first ad read in the books. We can let the users in the chat and our comment section grade me out. Let me know what I got to improve on that. But hey, this is now time that we've waited for a while on this front to recap signing day. It got wild. Travel plans, Christmas, and bowl travel. Let's give the people what they want after having to listen to me. It's time to talk about signing day, Shay.
Yes, and we will focus here over the next course of this podcast and then on the high school guys. So they signed 25 high school prospects. Then we will come back again this week with a transfer portal podcast. Brian Kelly announced 7 transfer portal additions. There will be more down the road. You can catch kind of some of our thoughts there on the website on the Bengal Tiger. Still $1 for a year, and you get the hat that Billy's rocking right there. I do not know how much longer the $1 for the year is going to last. So if you haven't jumped on it, do so. But yes, signing day. I believe, Billy, they finished, or they're sitting currently at number 6 or 7 in the rankings, which we talked a lot about when people just, hey, Billy, Shay, where do you think they'll finish out? We said in that 4 to 8 range. That's where they are. That's a really good class, especially if you've addressed needs. And I don't know where you want to start. There's so many different elements of this that I think are important to hit on, but let's talk about actually the comings and goings of signing day that brought maybe the big news, because a lot of guys, and I hate this because I really think people lose focus of all the kids who stuck with you and signed, and were committed and were trying to get flipped by other schools and never budged and ended up signing with the Tigers. So we'll touch on some of those guys, but let's hit the headliners first. And we'll touch on 3 guys here because there was an element of kind of all 3 that became signing day news. 1, Daylen Austin flips from LSU to Oregon on signing day, a cornerback, a big position of need for them that they've already now addressed in the portal. We'll talk about that later on. But Daylen Austin, we knew this one was coming from talking to people at LSU. They knew and then pointed to the fact that Oregon having one of his old high school coaches on staff really opened the door for them to always get him onto campus. He was taking other visits elsewhere. They were not surprised at all that the flip ultimately came on signing day. They knew it was coming. We shared with the board that we fully expected that if he did sign in the early period, it would not be with LSU. There was a time where he said he was going to hold off until February. His mom even told you that they thought they were going to hold off until February. You see Billy with the eye roll there. It did not play out that way. He indeed signed with Oregon. Then at the same time, let's stick with the same position. Cornerback Desmond Ricks. I almost said Eli there. Desmond Ricks goes from kind of at the beginning of the week, we had heard LSU was leading to then we kind of started to break it to the board that, hey, look, things are trending in the other direction now. NIL became a big factor there down the stretch. We'll talk a little bit about that. And the third one being, so 2 cornerbacks not in the boat. No surprise that they turn around and sign Denver Harris and Zy Alexander, 2 corners out of the portal. So quickly kind of made up for those guys not being part of the class, or at least softened the blow. But then they get Kamorian Pimpton on signing day, flipping him from Vanderbilt. Texas was in the mix. A lot of schools were knocking on the door, trying to get in the mix. LSU and Texas were the only 2 that were able to get him on campus for visits. 6'6", in the 230 range, Billy, one of the best pass catchers at tight end in this class. They actually signed a couple of good ones in Jackson McGohan another pass catcher at tight end, as well as Pimpton. Then you've got Mac Markway, who certainly will come on as sort of a blocker first. So the tight end spot got a lot of help. But I love Pimpton, and I think he's going to have a big career in Baton Rouge. I think he got really overshadowed on signing day, not just by LSU signing 25 guys and him just being one of them, but by the fact that everybody was paying attention to what Desmond Ricks was going to do, not so much the excitement over Pimpton landing a tight end. But you had seen him in person at North Crowley. They were an undefeated team for much of the season. He played a big role in that. And he's just, there's, as Brian Kelly said, when Brian Kelly was at Cincinnati, he had Travis Kelce. When he was at Notre Dame, he had a ton of tight ends that are still in the NFL. He said Pimpton is about as good of a combination of just pure size and athleticism, 6'6", 235, 240, and then pass catching ability. So Kelly said, as we hone him into that, full tight end role of being able to be an inline guy, flexing him out, doing everything they want to do at the tight end, that the upside there, Brian Kelly said, is about as good as you can ask for in a tight end, and it's about as good as he's seen. So a position that in my mind was the weakest on the team this year, where essentially they just had to rely on Mason Taylor, a true freshman. Cole Taylor ends up transferring out after the season. You were down to just Mason Taylor. So to come away from signing day with 3 tight ends, I thought was a really big deal.
Yeah, and I mean, watching Pimpton this year, both on film and then getting to see him in person and kind of put all that together, I mean, what a prospect. I mean, he is just, in terms of upside, in terms of what you want when you recruit players who maybe aren't, let's just say like a Deshaun Womack, who's going to come right in and you fully expect him to be potentially a starter next year. When you sign a guy like Kamorian Pimpton, who already had 1,000 yards and I believe probably finished with 18 touchdowns on the
Yeah, I think he
season,
had 17, 18, yeah.
17, 18 touchdowns. You have somebody that has been really productive, but then you see him in person and he's got all this frame to add some weight, add some muscle. He had just transferred to North Crowley, so he was just even getting comfortable in their offense this year. We talked about it at length, kind of previewing his decision. I think this is a massive, massive land for LSU because you bring back these 3 receivers, you sign a great class of receivers, but then you add in Pimpton, who can move all over. I mean, you give him time this summer to work with the strength and conditioning staff. He's going to add some weight. They'll eventually be able to move him down and be kind of a reliable blocker. He's willing, he's able athletically to do it. He just needs more size to him in terms of mass. But what a frame. I believe he's got one of the top catch radiuses in the entire country out of wide receivers and tight ends. He's somebody that Mike Denbrock's going to be able to play around with, quite honestly. He's not going to be a receiver. He's going to be a tight end, but he does have that ability to flex out. Jackson McGohan is more of a true tight end. So you bring those 2 guys in, and we'll see what Mac Markway does, as well as having Mason Taylor back. A tight end room, at least for the long-term future, is very much solidified. We'll see if they, go after a tight end in the portal. It's a very thin portal crop. It was the same story last year. They have somebody that's done it a bit in Mason Taylor. They lost Cole Taylor. They might rely on these freshmen early on, and they'll see what the portal brings. But look, I think to win that battle over Vanderbilt was a lot harder than people give them credit for. He's a very loyal kid. He really struggled with it from what we heard behind the scenes, and he really kept to himself for the most part about his recruitment and his decision. And so, Texas had him on campus, but they never really kind of even sniffed this one. We heard it was an LSU Vanderbilt battle pretty much after the dust settled on that front. So, big recruiting win. You mentioned Desmond Ricks. Daylen Austin goes elsewhere. Isaac Smith, which, we kind of heard early in the week was just going to end up signing with Mississippi State. And there's plenty of reasons why, he just ended up staying in Mississippi. But as far as Ricks, we can kind of transition into that one. Monday, I think it was Monday, we had heard that things were trending well. LSU held on to its lead. And this is where things get just a little dicey in these final hours of recruiting. And then I believe on Tuesday, I put the pick in for LSU to land Desmond Ricks. And by late that night, we had gotten tipped off that something was amiss. And this is just, I think, an example of just how hard it is sometimes to beat out in Alabama. It's just a prime example of it. LSU's done it before. We just talked about them beating out Bama for Kayshon Boutte. He's a Louisiana kid. And sometimes recruitments don't go their way. I was on earlier this week with one of the guys on Jordy's show with Nick, and I just said, look, they did a really good job on this recruitment, and sometimes they don't go your way. And when the Ricks family said, you know what, we are done, there wasn't time for LSU to make that final counter, and you posted it on the board. And I agree. I think this is a recruitment that they would not have lost for NIL if they were given another chance. And it was just the timing of the family that they said, you know what, we're good and we're ready to make the final call. And I think that's kind of what that's kind of as simple as I can make it. You know, I mean, teams are trading punches, but when they finally made that decision, they stuck with it and didn't keep things open for LSU to take the final swing, which, you know, quite frankly, they, in terms of NIL, they had a very, very, very good package.
And people think NIL too, and they see some of these quarterback numbers. We're not talking millions of dollars here. The numbers we have heard are not even close to that, but it was one of those things. Look, we don't know the true details because they don't make any of this stuff public, right? Like, we don't know exactly what it was, but from talking to enough people on both sides, it sounded like LSU had a spot that they were already at that others were not. That's why LSU was sort of out front. He had obviously made a ton of trips to LSU. He felt good there. But as things went back and forth, and look, you can make a bunch of trips to LSU and feel good about it. He had made about the same amount of trips to Bama, and it was very clear that he was interested in their program. I think it got to a point where Bama came right back to where LSU was at and said, basically, take it or leave it. We're not getting into a bidding war, and he took it. And that's okay. Look, NIL's legal. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you want to let that factor into your decision, that's fine. I think when all things are even and you've got Bama and LSU, for an out-of-state kid like him who's from Virginia, he played at IMG, he views Bama in a different light than LSU, at least in terms of win-losses over the course of his recruitment, his high school career. I also think when he reclassified, that shrunk what would have been a year and a half of recruiting into like 3 months. So we said all along, this is going to come down to those final visits. It's going to come down to the final week. And that's exactly what happened. And he was high on Florida after their visit. Then he gets high on Bama after the visit. Then LSU feels good about things. And all of a sudden LSU enters the week as the presumed leader, and Bama comes back and ultimately signs him. And I do think, like, people were saying, like, oh, LSU wasn't willing to, get into the NIL game and match Bama. I don't think it was any of that. I think both teams were about right at the same spot in terms of kind of what the NIL future would look like for a kid like Ricks, and he chose Bama. That is what it is. And people say, oh, this never happens to Kirby Smart. Look, Georgia's undefeated. They're coming off a national championship. They're the number 1 seed, and Bama signed the 2 best players in Georgia that Georgia wanted badly. So this is happening across the board. Bama, let me remind you how mad Nick Saban was that A&M went out, and as he said, well, they just bought everybody. And every year prior to that, Bama was the number 1 team. If you didn't think Bama was going to come back this cycle and sign 7 or 8 5-stars, you were kidding yourself, because that's just what they were going to do. Nick Saban was, again, let me remind you, that was not a press conference when Nick Saban said, well, they just went out and outspent everybody. That was a booster event to Alabama boosters. Nick Saban was sending a very clear message. If we're entering this NIL thing, this is on y'all. Let's step it up. We've got to rally the troops. And if not, people like A&M who have more money are just going to go out and spend it on kids. And where's A&M right now? That approach didn't work. They're well outside the top 10. They hemorrhaged a bunch of their class. A lot of guys hit the portal from a year ago. So I think every team is finding out how to balance NIL with the locker room, or what's smart, or what do you really want to promise to a kid who's never played a down? Do you want to really put more focus into kids who are on the team and you've seen them produce, and then they get those NIL opportunities? And all of that will be a work in progress as time goes on. And I don't think, I'll say this, and everyone that I've talked to has said the same. If you're talking about for next year, Daylen Austin was the bigger loss. Daylen Austin is college ready right now. Desmond Ricks needs to be developed, but he has raw tools, I think, that college coaches, especially corner coaches, see and say, hey, I can mold him into something special. So perhaps long term, Desmond Ricks will be the better player. We'll see. But LSU needs help right now. I thought Daylen Austin was the bigger loss for them, especially given he was committed for 6 months. Desmond Ricks was never committed to LSU. He was just in the mix. And people will say, like, oh, well, we were always the leader. Desmond never said that. That was just buzz being put together by all the schools that were sort of recruiting him, saying, hey, we feel like we're chasing LSU, and or LSU sources being like, hey, we feel like we're the lead dog here. This isn't a Patrick Surtain situation where he himself just went out and said for 2 years, LSU's my favorite team. They're my leader. And on signing day signs with Bama. That's not what happened here. They were in a dogfight all the way, especially with the reclassification. And ultimately, it doesn't go your way, but you move on. One kid is not going to make or break a program. Certainly not one kid who's going to need a lot of development. Like you said, this is not a Deshaun Womack, the edge rusher they signed out of Maryland, who could climb even higher than the number 20 player in the country. I think he and Keon Keeley, who signed with Bama, are the two best edge rushers in America. His stats were ridiculous. Womack's were playing for a St. Francis team that played all the best competition. Like, you think IMG plays good teams? St. Francis is going around playing all the best teams in the country. He had, 17 sacks and like 30 tackles for loss. And they only played 10 games. So there's a thought that he's the BJ Ojulari replacement, heir apparent, Harold Perkins type of like, hey, he's going to be all over the place in year one. So it wasn't that kind of loss. It still stings because you really needed corner depth, and he could be a good developmental guy that ends up being a really good player for you, but it didn't work out. And the same for Daylen Austin. I think with Daylen Austin, it's the risk you run of recruiting California kids. Like, when you have to sign, that's just so far from home. And what does he do? He stays on the West Coast and goes to Oregon. No different when I told people, and we both did, and everybody agrees here, has been around recruiting long enough. When people were saying, oh, when are you going to put your picks in for Isaac Smith to LSU? Everyone else is putting in picks for Isaac Smith to LSU. Yep. If you think that an uncommitted Mississippi kid is not going to have everything done for them to keep them in state by Mississippi State or Ole Miss at signing day, then you haven't been following recruiting long enough. He stayed home. That was not a surprise. And I think that this staff will realize this. A lot of this staff has not recruited Mississippi before, if you're coming from Notre Dame and things like that. But Mississippi is just one of those states where it's very, very tough to go in there and get the best players, especially if they're remaining uncommitted towards signing day. And you think that then you'll pull them outside the state. I can remember, Billy, throughout much of the process this season, that it almost felt like a foregone conclusion from the Bama side that they were getting Suntarine Perkins, a linebacker out of Mississippi, who's one of the best players in Mississippi. Lo and behold, he sticks with the Rebels and signs with Ole Miss. So recruiting Mississippi is a very tough task if you think you're having to go down there until the very end. Like, they've signed guys out of Mississippi, but Deion Smith, others were committed. They were already in the boat. So, like, it was just about holding on to them. Going to get a kid like that is tough at the end. It's why we never put picks in. It's why we said we thought he was going to just go to state and stay home. Not a surprise. Not a surprise to me. A California kid ends up staying out west. And this is all part of college coaching staffs. And now the one at LSU, realizing that and adjusting the approach moving forward. I doubt that they're going to be heavy in California like they were on Daylen Austin. I doubt that they're going to be hinging any sort of big positional plans on getting Mississippi kids that aren't already committed and taking it to signing day. So it's just things you learn as you go through a process. And much like with NIL, you're always going to be evolving. And we'll see how the staff approaches things this next cycle. But all the fanfare of the actual signing day aside, really great class. And Billy, they got 24 guys that were committed, tossing Pimpton to get to 25, across the finish line. And I can very vividly remember people saying they'll never sign all four of the receivers. Jaylen Brown is in Miami's territory. Miami's NIL and everybody. They'll never get him. They signed all four of the receivers. Kyle Parker's flirting with Texas. Everybody's on Kyle Parker. He's not going to be able to get out of the Lone Star State. no drama. Both those guys were among the first kids to sign in the morning. So the staff did a really nice job of holding on to guys that, and I think this is important to remember because I think this is a real testament to how good this staff is at pitching a vision. 22, mind you, Deron Reed and Joshua Mickens decommitted, two kids that were part of the class, but they entered the year with 23 commits. That was before a game was ever played. That was before they ever beat Bama or won the West or any of that. 23 kids had bought into just the vision of Kelly's program. And I can remember it vividly. I won't say his name, but after the Florida State game when they lost, we were catching up with recruits. And one recruit told us, "Oh, no, I knew that they weren't going to be any good this year. The coaches told me that at LSU. And I still committed anyways." They said, year one is not where we're going to want to be. We're patching together a roster. We're bringing in new coordinators, bringing in 9 of 10 new on-field coaches. We have a new head coach, a new strength coach, a new nutritionist. Everything had been turned over. Vegas set the over-under at 6.5 wins. LSU was telling kids in the offseason, here's where we're going to go, but it won't be this year. Well, lo and behold, they win the West in year one, far exceeding expectations. That gets you excited about what's to come. But those kids who all bought in on just the vision, I think are going to be, they're really happy about those guys because now those guys got to see, whoa, y'all are really putting this together quickly. I feel even better about my decision. And from talking to a couple of coaches, these kids are signed now so they can talk about them. There are a lot of coaches on the staff right now who are excited about the kids they brought in because they are like, these kids want to be here. And there was never any doubt because when other schools tried to flip them, they said, thank you, but no thank you. I'm staying committed. And that's what you want in the transfer portal era is guys who want to be there. You don't want to be pulling an arm and a leg and twisting their arm on signing day eve to get them to come. And a year later, they're gone, because things didn't work out for whatever reason. So as you build a roster that actually year to year has some sustainability, you want to be getting guys who want to be at LSU. And I know that sounds sort of like cheesy, like you want talent. They got talent. They got guys who fit needs. But I think they also did a good job of getting guys who just want to be part of the program. They want to play at LSU. And I also think they got a lot of leaders. I'll tell you this, just from being around the team hotel, Billy, there's a lot of people excited about this class. And guys like Toviano, who they think are going to be real leaders in the locker room and can galvanize a safety room or a corner room or just a defense, whatever it might be, and can lead by example. So there's a lot of buzz around this class, top to bottom. You look at the bottom, the lowest ranked guys are Dylan Carpenter and Ashton Stamps. They're two of my favorite guys in the class. I thought Dylan Carpenter out of Santa Mont was a great late flip for them, getting him away from UL into LSU's class. I think he'll play a lot of football. Ashton Stamps comes out of a Rummel program that just does such a great job of getting guys ready for the next level and having that mentality built in to compete. And Stamps showed it. He came to camp in the summer 3 different times before he finally got offered and just kept working and working and working. So top to bottom, I love the class. They signed a trio of 5 stars in Womack and Lance Hurd and Shelton Sampson. You keep the 2 5-stars from Louisiana at home, those 2 guys that were committed. Other schools tried to flip them. They didn't waver. And they did a really good job of, this is something I was talking about with some members of the staff this week, and we're sort of just reflecting upon when they first got here. There was a reality that when they got here, you lean on Louisiana. That, like Brian Kelly said, I came here because Louisiana gives us such good, gives LSU such good a base level for being good. Like if you just signed Louisiana guys every year, you'd have a top 10 class every single year. So if you can hone in on Louisiana and then use your national brand to go get Womack and go to Minnesota and get Jackson Howard, go to Miami and get Jaylen Brown, get into Texas and stuff like that and beat out A&M in Texas for guys like Pimpton and Kyle Parker, then you're setting yourself up really well. Now you're knocking on the door for a top 5 class. That's where they sat pretty much all year. But to double back to what I was saying, a lot of people feel like, man, when we got here, we were told you have no shot at Arch Manning. You have no shot at Jaden Osbury. You have no shot at Tackett Curtis. You have no shot at Derek Williams. well, that's 4 of the top 10 kids in Louisiana. Like, what do we do from here? Well, then they just went out and got every other kid in Louisiana that was a big time recruit. None of them went anywhere else. Every single one of them chose LSU. So as you move forward, I think they're going to have a really nice kind of foundation set of how we recruit Louisiana, how you attack the state, how you prioritize it. And you look at it this year, Bama, who has typically been the only team that can come in and take the high profile guys, they signed one player out of Louisiana, and it was Eli Holstein at quarterback, who belongs in that initial conversation of you were never getting Eli Holstein. He was committed to A&M at the time anyways, and he flipped to Bama. So I think the staff did a really good job. If I'm thinking about like the whole cycle put together, of stepping into a situation where 5 of the top 10 players in the state were not coming to LSU, and there's nothing they were going to do to change their minds. So for them to be able to pivot, clean up the rest of Louisiana, and then go outside the state and sign the guys that they did was impressive. I really am high on this class. I think it filled a lot of needs, and more so than anything, and I said this after the Desmond Ricks thing, the transfer portal is there as a buffer that no longer makes you feel like missing out on a couple of kids that were big targets for you ruined a class, and it bums you out if you're a staff member or coach that's put years into recruiting a kid and at the end he goes somewhere else. And that's natural, just building relationships. But if you can turn around 2 days later after losing Daylen Austin and Desmond Ricks and sign a 2-time FCS All-American in Zai Alexander out of Southeastern, a Lauraville kid who a lot of people liked coming out of high school, who's now been in a college program, has a lot of starts. He can come in and help right away. Denver Harris, midseason All-American before he ran into his troubles and didn't play the rest of the way, but he was a 5-star a year ago. Aaron Anderson comes, yeah, you're losing Kayshon Boutte. That was kind of expected anyways. What wasn't expected was a year after Aaron Anderson signs with Bama and leaves the state, that here he is coming back home to play for the Tigers. The portal can hurt you if you've got guys going in that you don't want being in the portal, but it can really save you. And we're seeing that here early in the Brian Kelly era, and he doesn't want that to be the case every year. And we've already seen it drop drastically. They signed 15 high school kids and 20 portal kids in Brian Kelly's first year. This year, they signed 25 high school kids, and they're at 7 portal additions. So the numbers are already flipped. He said he wants it to be more of, we're signing about 29, 30 total guys a year, and 25 are high school guys, 4 or 5 are portal guys that will help us out. But you aren't every year just having to rely on the portal to, build a roster. And I think with 30 plus years of coaching experience, Brian Kelly knows what he's doing. He's got a lot of talented coaches on staff who have experience. They'll be fine. I'm impressed by what they've done in just 1 year, beyond winning the West and having a chance at a 10-win season and finishing in the top 15 in the rankings, and potentially appearing as a top 10 team to open the season next year, having a top 10 recruiting class. There is nothing to complain about after 1 year of the Brian Kelly era. In fact, it's just a lot to be excited about.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, you look back at this whole cycle, and I mean, when they first got here, they dished out a lot of 24, 25 offers. But if you watch 2023, they were fairly targeted. There are a lot of offers that you'll see on our offer list page that came from the prior staff. I mean, Ruben Owens, for one, there are some other ones that, they kind of tried to get in on. I mean, if you look back at some of the recruitments over the course of the whole run for Brian Kelly when he got here, I mean, I think of a Brandon Ennis, who I visited in Miami. He said, I want to, take an LSU official visit. Well, LSU didn't even official him. And that one kind of faded away. They didn't waste their time, I felt like, in this cycle. And I think that's important because there were players in the past and we sat here early in the season when the buzz started to build around Desmond Ricks. And I said, this recruitment's probably going to come down to the final 24 hours or so. I guess I forgot that a little bit on the timing of my pick, but that's okay. At the time, I was told he was going to sign with LSU Wednesday morning, announce Thursday night, and put the pick in. Pretty good intel, backed up by LSU sources who were like, probably not supposed to tell you that, but that's what we're kind of thinking right now. Wasn't set in stone, of course. They knew that with recruiting. It wasn't like they were going to be caught flat-footed. They kept swinging away at the recruitment, but they didn't have recruitments that like you said, they based their whole class around, or they drummed up buzz that wasn't there. Like they could have probably found a way to stay in the race for Yonel Aguero, for example. But Yonel Aguero was never going to go to LSU. Was never going to end up there. Brandon Ennis, they could have wasted an official visit on him. Ohio State held all the buzz pretty much on that one, start to finish. There were other prospects across the board that they just didn't waste their time with. And sometimes the cookie crumbles in the right way. You look at the receiver class that they ended up with. You look at the defensive tackle class, which, we don't have anything to drink, but defensive tackle mentioned there. Yeah, there you go. That's vodka Shea. And, they were still very targeted. Amari Washington, Duron Reed, only a few defensive tackle targets that Jamar Cain was really swinging on. And they just didn't waste their time. And I think that's important in terms of looking at this as a whole, because they went in on guys that they felt they could get. And for the most part, they got them. Brad Davis probably officialed the most players out of any position group. And I'm just kind of saying that off the top of my head. And he had big targets out there like TJ Shanahan and Chase Basantis. But he also was swinging on Lance Hurd, Tyree Adams, DJ Chester, and LSU, even as Auburn late down the stretch tried to get him. Florida State tried to get him. But Auburn was the leader this summer before that official visit. Michigan held a silent commitment from him at one point from Paul Mabenga. And they were able to swing away, get in there, and get them done. And I think those are very important things to keep in mind when looking at this class and this process as a whole. They really did a good job covering their bases. Deshaun Womack was getting pressed all the way until signing day. I was even told by a source elsewhere in the SEC, watch out. If you're looking for one surprise that might not be on your radar right now, Deshaun Womack. But Jamar Cain got him signed, got him on board, and he's probably one of the most important signees. Honestly, maybe the most important signee out of the high school ranks in this class outside of a Javian Toviano, just kind of off the top of my head. Those are the type of things that this coaching staff accomplished, and they didn't do it without NIL. Everybody, you talked about the vision. These kids bought into the vision, but also at the end of the day, you need NIL. These kids, especially at the highest level, aren't signing for free for the most part. Very, very few. And even if it's a little deal with a local business, even if it's this, even if it's that, they did it the right way with their targeted approach of players. We saw guys like Salmon Pemba say, I'm an official visit to LSU. LSU said, we're not going to waste our time. And I think that's important. They knew what they were up against with certain, they were cutting it close on official visits. They knew they needed to, distribute that appropriately, and they didn't waste their time. And they signed a terrific class because of it. They supplemented with the portal well. I think with guys like Isaac Smith and Desmond Ricks, you can't fault them for swinging away there, and you can't fault them for staying in it to the very end. Maybe Isaac Smith, you look back and you say, oh, he's a Mississippi kid, but he was also pretty active about getting to LSU. And so I just think they did a really nice job of not wasting their time. We look back at some classes in the past, and you could say, oh, that kid's not going to end up at LSU. They lead in the summer, but he's not going to end up there. This year, they got the guys that they officialed for the most part. They got the guys they felt they could get out of Louisiana, and really good players they didn't reach. I mean, we were sitting here at the beginning of December saying, okay, they could get Harvey Broussard in. They could get Carl Williams in. Does Ashley Williams open things up? Does this guy, does that guy in Louisiana? They didn't reach. They just said, you know what, we're good with what they have. And I think that says a lot about how they're going to approach things. I can't stand reaching just to fill a position, and you have the transfer portal for that reason as well to help supplement.
I think that because of the portal, you're not reaching on a lot of guys anymore. And look, they'll take guys that they think they can develop, but then again, they're like Louisiana guys. Again, the lowest ranked guys in this class per the rankings. Dylan Carpenter, that was a senior year eval from Louisiana, and they felt great about. Ashton Stamps, Louisiana guy that they had in camp multiple times over the summer. They put their own eyes on it. They felt good about it. I'll say this as we wrap up, Billy, because everyone, again, drank D-line talk here, D-tackle talk. So much rhetoric on our board is LSU will never be on Bama or Georgia's level if they can't recruit D linemen like that. Well, let me break this down for you in a couple parts. One, your D line recruiting from the start is going to be based off what Louisiana gives you. When they give you Mason Smith, you're set. That's a 5-star. You just recruit him, he holds it down for you. That's, big time, right? When you look at what Alabama and Georgia did, people are putting this rhetoric forward. Oh, if we're going to be on their level, we have to keep up with them. Okay, let's see what Bama did. D-line, they signed James Smith, a 5-star. He's from Montgomery. Let's keep it rolling. D-line, Jordan Renaud, who's there's only a handful of top 50 D tackles anyways. Jordan Renaud, they went to Tyler, Texas. They got him. So you did a nice job. You went out of state and got a guy. LSU had done that as well with Deron Reed, who's ranked even higher than that. But at the end of the day, Auburn, the school close to home, comes calling through a coaching change. NIL comes into play. And now all of a sudden he's not in the class anymore. You look more at Bama, they signed one more D lineman, or two more, Edric Hill and Hunter Osborne, but Osborne's from Trustville, Alabama. Edric Hill was a guy that LSU looked at and really didn't even get that deeply involved in. And he ends up in Alabama's class coming out of Missouri. You look at Georgia. Georgia signed Jordan Hall. Everyone knew Georgia had led for Jordan Hall forever. That was not a big thing. Bama was trying to flip him. Ends up not working. 6 with Georgia, which where everyone thought he would go coming out of Jacksonville. But point being, you move beyond him. The next ranked D lineman that Georgia signed was 172 in the country. Outside the top 20 D tackles, Jamal Jarrett coming out of North Carolina. And that was it. That was their haul. They're not out there rolling out 4 or 5 stars that signed as D tackles. And you look at the D tackles nationally, Billy, David Hicks out of Katy, you saw him play a million times. Where does he go? He goes to A&M. He stays in state. James Smith, we already mentioned him, number 2 D tackle in the country from Montgomery, Alabama. Where does he go? He goes to Bama. Peter Woods is the number 3 in some places, and let's at least call him a top 5 defensive tackle in the class from Alabaster. That's the shadows of Tuscaloosa. He goes to Clemson. So even Bama, is going to have guys from inside the state go elsewhere. Davin Hobbs is a highly ranked guy from North Carolina. He's going to Tennessee. Clemson went into Georgia and took Vic Burley, who was a guy that Georgia was on. Florida went to Alabama and took Kelby Collins, who was a guy that was being recruited by Bama. So even Bama and Georgia are dealing with, hey, look, we've got guys in state, but other teams are coming in and grabbing them. We focus maybe on some other guys. They miss on Jordan Hall at the end. So it wasn't a deep D tackle class to start with. So when you had Deron Reed committed, you felt really good about it. It wasn't like you had 4 guys committed, but you felt really good about the one you had. So that burned them late. That will be one of the things you look back and wish you could have gotten done for you. But still, the point remains for me, there aren't teams, even Bama and Georgia, out there signing 2 and 3 5-star defensive tackles. Just didn't happen this cycle. And the portal can help you there. They've already addressed some portal needs along the D line. They'll have to do it more. But you'll have to now focus on next year. What does Louisiana give you on the defensive line? Lock them in early, then expand from there. Jamar Cain has worked all over Arizona State, Oklahoma, schools where he had to recruit nationally. He's got a foothold in different places. He went and got Womack out of the Baltimore, D.C. area. That was a big one. You can think he'll do that again in terms of knowing he has to go get interior defensive linemen. And let's remember, Mason Smith is back. Mekhi Wingo's back. They will be your 2 starters. Jaquelin Roy was always thought to head pro. You'll see what Guillory can give you as that 3rd guy. I've talked to a lot of people who think that Guillory's really going to take a leap forward with Jaquelin gone from the room, just because now there's a lot more snaps to go around. Jaquelin was really, when Mason was hurt, Jaquelin and Mekhi were getting all the attention, then playing like 90% of the snaps during games. You think Jacobian can make that leap? We'll see what some of these transfer portal guys can do for him. But again, it's a position you're low at, just like corner, and you just hope you can build enough this offseason to where you can get through another season, recruit some more guys into the program, and develop them. This was never going to be an overnight situation where you've built a whole new team that you feel great about long-term in the Brian Kelly era. There were always going to be pieces that you said, that spot right there still needs work. And from the day Brian Kelly was hired and they went out and signed a bunch of portal additions at corner that were all grad transfers that only had 1 year of eligibility pretty much, and Mekhi Garner being the only one who didn't, and he had such a good year that he's going to go pro now, that we called it out then. This is a 2 to 3 year rebuild at corner. You do not have a bunch of young guys in there that it's next man up. So we saw them take Denver Harris. We saw them take Zy Alexander. We're seeing them on Cypress coming out of Virginia, who they're pushing for a visit. He's the top uncommitted prospect in the country in the portal right now. He's a cornerback. So they're still trying to address these needs, but there were going to be needs. That's not some end of the world, press the panic button. Is Robert Steeples and Jamar Cain and Kelly good enough? Do they see it? Of course they see it. If we see it, they see it. And they've been around this business a long time. They'll get things figured out. They see where the needs are. And again, this is, as a program, you're on a multi-year rebuild. This was not a 1 year fix, especially when you took so many transfers last year. They're bringing that number down some. And I think it's still a reason to be excited for the future of the program after winning the West and now finishing with a top 7 class.
Well said. I think, like you said, if they see it, we see it. I think that's one thing that the staff does fairly well. I think they recognize certain things and certain chatter. Doesn't mean they listen to the fans by any means. They do their own thing, but they're very good, I think, about being aware of what needs to actually be addressed versus just kind of taking a my way or the highway approach on recruiting. So with that, guys, we've gone over an hour now. We are going to let Shay get back to SeaWorld or Disneyland or whatever he wants to do. Shopping, I hear, is on the agenda for Shay, as everybody knows, is a big fashionista or fashionista.
That's right.
I guess. But with that, we're going to shut down this edition of the podcast, guys. $1 for a year. Subscribe to the Bengal Tiger. Get the hat. We're coming up on our 1 year anniversary. So I would imagine this $1 for a year is not going to be around much longer. Jump on board. We're closing in on 4,000 subscribers to the site, which is unbelievable. Took us years and years at our previous stop to get there. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. Hit that subscribe button. We appreciate all you guys listening. We hope this podcast gave you some, a little bit of a gift for us missing out around the holidays, and helps you as you're running around with family as the new year approaches. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of the podcast to talk about more in depth those transfer additions to the Tigers and kind of preview the Purdue game as well, set for Monday night. So with that, for Shay Dixon, I'm Billy Embody, shutting down this edition of the Bengal Tiger Podcast. Thanks for listening, everyone. And a quick reminder to check out rogueshop.com, ROGUE shop.com. Appreciate their first podcast as our subscribers. So catch you next time. And thanks for listening.